Welcome to Programming Rainbow. In this video, we will be working on Advent of Code Day 2. We'll be using Scratch. Maybe I just couldn't think of it the right way, or I'm not really sure, but I had a really rough time. I even went so far as to go to the Reddit page and checking out their edge cases, and my code passed almost every single one of them except one or two. So I passed all the test stuff. I passed all that, and I've tried it over the last 3 days, maybe 15 hours or 20 hours worth. And I submitted maybe 12 times, not over and over again, but after going through and just searching for red herrings over and over again, I finally got somebody else's C code and then solved it and took out their safe ones and their unsafe ones, and then used that as input in mine to catch more edge cases. So I just really had a rough time with this one. So it was very demoralizing. I guess everybody has it happen. Maybe I just couldn't see it, like sometimes you might be just staring at it. And I haven't used Scratch in a couple of years, but I just couldn't visualize it either. So it was a very tough time for me. So if anybody else has had this kind of happen to them where they just felt like they just could not get anywhere, that's what I had going on with this one. So here's day 2. I actually have never submitted the answer, but I'm pretty sure I've got it working now. So, because I actually put a typo when I was about to submit it in my other profile before this video. So it was actually wrong again, but it was because of a typo, not because of my calculation. Yeah, so we're going to use Scratch. And I'm just going to close this stuff up. And let's make it full screen. So I need a list. So I'm going to pull in, let's see, make a list here. I'm going to call this list example, just to pull in some example numbers. We should actually go back and look at what's going on here. So let me do that. So the day 2 one, we have the red nose reindeer nuclear fusion fission reactor. And we need to make sure the test that they're either going up or going down, but only by 1, 2, or 3. So this one is going upwards. We have 1, then we have 2, it goes up by 1. But then when it goes from 2 to 7, it goes up by 5, which is too much. It can't go up by that much. So that would be a failure. It can be either going up or going down, but it can only go up by 1, 2, or 3. So it can't stay the same and it can't go down, so like this one with 4 and 4, this would be a failure here. So that's our first one. So this test data 76421, I believe I've already have this in a text file that I'm going to upload. Let's see here. Yeah, the example one. So I'm going to remove the empty one here. 76421. Hopefully that was correct. 764. Yeah. Okay. So the strategy I'm going to do with this, and like I said, I'm probably doing this the absolute worst way, but this is just the solution I came up with. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to take each one of these lines and split it out into its own list that I'm going to call buffer. So I'm going to make another one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a function that parses one of these inputs from the list into the buffer input. So basically I want to take, say, this 76421, and I want to create a buffer list that has 7 on one line, 6 on one line, and so on and so forth. Just to make it a little bit easier to deal with. Let's make my block code, and we'll say to parse one of the entry points into the list to make its own list that's a buffer. So I'll call it parse, and I'm going to have an input that I'll call input, and I'll just put another text. And we'll do that. Run without screen refresh. First thing I'm going to do is delete the buffer. because I could have stuff, stuff from a previous time that I call this. Each time I call this, I'm filling out a new buffer. So when I call it again, whatever was in the last buffer, I want to get rid of it and put new stuff in the buffer. So the first thing I'm going to do is delete the buffer, and then I want an accumulator because I'm breaking it on space. So I'm going to keep accumulating the number until it hits space, and then I'm going to put it on a new line or fill in that line, go down to the next line. So I'm going to create a couple variables like an input index and a buffer accumulator. Let's see, out of my block, go here, variable. So I'll call this one input index. And this one will be the buffer accumulator. Okay, so I want to set the buffer accumulator to 0, but the input index to 1. So buffer accumulator is 0, and the index needs to be 1 because it's a scratch. It's 1 base. So input index. And then we need to repeat. And it's going to be the length of the input. So whatever this input is going to be one of the strings of, let's show it here. So say this top one right here, that's going to be the input. And then the next one will be the input, the next one. So it's going to be, this is going to be turned into the buffer. So I need the length of this. And I'm going to loop over it basically. So length, that's not the right one. It's the other type. It's the string length. Yeah, this one. Whoops. So I'm going to say length of input. And that's how many times I'm going to loop. This index is going to be used over this input. So I'm going to increment this. So I'm going to increment the input index by 1, but it's going to be at the bottom of this repeat loop. So I need to get one of the items out now. I'm going to pull out each time. We need another variable, and this one's going to be called, it's an item, the input item, let's say. Okay, and this will set the input item. And this will be from a letter from the input, basically. Okay, so where is that? That is right here. So that's from the input, and we'll use the index, input index right here to get the letter out that we're going to get. And this should be input item. So that's given us our input item. And we want to make sure that it is not, we want to make sure it's not a space. So I want the control, I'm going to use the if else. These are all going to go into this repeat loop. So it's going to be like this. So we need to check this input to see if it's not equal to a space. Or if it is equal, because it's an if else block, that doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to put a space in here. And then the input item. So you can't see it, but there's a space there. So if it is a space, I'm going to add the buffer accumulator to the buffer. So I'm going to close this example right here and show the buffer. So there's nothing in the buffer. So basically, whenever I hit a space, whatever I've accumulated in my accumulator, I'm going to dump it to that one of the lines of the buffer. So add, I think it's this one, add thing. Yeah. And this is going to be the whatever we've accumulated so far. So it's going to be the buffer accumulator. And we'll see how the buffer accumulator will work. And if we do this where we've added one of the items to the buffer, basically, we need to reset the buffer to nothing. So then I'm going to set the buffer accumulator to 0 whenever I do that. But if we haven't hit a space, if we've hit another number, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to multiply the existing number by 10 to move it over to the left and add in the new input item. I think it's just set. Yeah. So I'm going to set the buffer accumulator, and it's going to be, I'm going to multiply and add just to move it over. So it's just basically if I had one digit in my accumulator and then I pull another digit, I need that first digit to move over to the left. So say I had 5 in the accumulator and then I pull in a 1, that 5 needs to turn into 50 and then I add the 1 to it. So that now I have 51 instead of just 5. So that they'll be on the same. But let's see again here. Example 1. Move this over. None of these are double digits, but imagine if one of these was multiple digits, say 3 digits long or 2 digits. If this was 71, I would pull the 7 and then I'd pull the 1. So the accumulator would need to change from 7 to 71. So I just multiply it by 10 and then add the 1. So this one's going to be the accumulator. So accumulator equals accumulator times 10. And then plus input item. And that will be the new accumulator. Let's see what we got here. This is going to go into the else. So basically, if it's not as space, it's doing this. Whenever it is a space, it's going to dump it to a new line of the buffer and reset the buffer accumulator. And that should be enough here. Let's just try it on one of these. So I will see the my block. Let me just copy this. Put it here. And this should show up in the buffer. Okay, that looks good. So it's 1, 3, 6, 7, 9, and I got 1, 3, 6, 6, 7, and no 9. Oh, I know what I need. This loop gets me all the way to the 9, but when I'm on the 9, that loop is done. So I need to, even though the item is still like, let's see if we can show the item. See, the input item is 9, but 9 never gets added to the buffer because we need to add one of these right here. Oops. I need to duplicate this. I only need this one. I just need on the very end to add the last item to the accumulator. Now we have 9 down here on the bottom. That works. Okay. So that looks like our parsing is working. So the very first thing we need to do is just find if it's going up or down. So I'm going to do this kind of lazy as I'm just going to have 2 different my blocks. One checks if it goes up, one checks if it goes down. I'll just put it underneath here, I guess. So let's go to my blocks. And this one is just going to be check buff increase. So check buff increasing. So this one is checking to see, if it's always going up, but I'm going to compare 2 items. So I'm going to have a first and a second. So that means more variables. Here's a first. A second. So I'm going to compare those 2. I also need like an index for this, like I did with the other one. So I'm going to give it its own index called buff index. The first one is just going to be the first item from the buffer. It's just always going to start out as the first item from the buffer. So I'm just going to go down here, set the first one right here, and it's just going to be item 1 of buffer. And then the buffer index, since I've already got item 1 from buffer, the next thing I need is the second item. So I'm just going to set the buffer index to 2 immediately. I'm just going to skip over 1 because I've just taken an item out of 1. I don't need to worry about 1 anymore. I'm starting on 2. So buff index is going to start at 2. So I need to repeat while the buffer is still smaller than the length of the buffer plus 1, which is basically while it's equal to or less than. So I did it that way. I don't know if there's a better way to do it. So I'm just going to put a repeat until length of the buffer. You probably need a not. And let's see, while this one, okay. And the buffer index input, where is it? Buff index. Let's think about this. So this is a repeat until, so I need a not. So repeat until buff index is bigger. That's probably just fine, right? Let's try that. Probably going to come back later to bite me. So we're going to repeat until, so we need the second item. And this one is going to be here, and we're going to use the buff index. Yeah. And we're also going to increment the buff index. On the bottom of this. I'll just pull it out for now. The last one is going to be like that. So we need to check now the first one and the second one. See here. I'm going to need one of these. One of these. So the second one needs to be bigger than the first one. Go to variables. So I need second to be bigger than first. Can't be equal. And I also need second to be not too big. So second's got to be smaller than, let's add one here. Then first plus 4. Okay, so it's got to be in that range. Basically, it's got to be first plus 1, 2, or 3. It's got to be bigger than first, but it's got to be smaller than first plus 4. Okay, so I'm going to use an AND on this. It's got to be both of these things. And basically, the problem is if it's not this. So if it's not this, something's gone wrong. The control. So let's just say it's an F1 for now. So here's second. Just change buff. And let's just say stop this script. So it's going to keep looking until this fails. When this fails, it's going to stop this script. If it doesn't fail, then we want to, do I have the overall accumulator? So I'm going to have an overall accumulator. So yeah, so this is going to be an overall accumulator. This one is just going to give me a +1 if the whole input is rising. So I'm going to just do a change accumulator 1. So basically, as long as it doesn't bail out in here, it's going to give me a +1 on this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to make another block here and make it decreasing. Just because laziness, there's probably some fancy way to do it, but yeah. Check buff decreasing. And it's going to be mostly the same. I'm going to put it beside it. It's just the math part. Okay, so on this one, these need to be switched around, and it needs to be a minus. So I need this -1 here. Yeah, it is a minus. Should be. That should be right. Let me double check. So the still second and first, but the direction is opposite for both, and that's a minus. Yeah. Okay. So this should be increasing, decreasing. Okay. So I need to kind of run these in a loop. I just chuck that away. I think we can just use the normal control. That's not that one. This guy up here. I'll just check that up here. So I'm gonna clear the accumulator. This is so the accumulator, just the one just called accumulator is the overreaching one. So that's gonna be the answer at the end. So I'm gonna clear it right in the beginning. So the accumulator gets cleared, and I have I'll just call it data index now. Basically, over the whatever the example data, I need an index into that. So I'll just call it that, data index. And that's going to be set to 1. Where is it? Okay, so I got data index. Now I need to loop through this. And I'm just going to, so there's a reason why I have an index right here. Well, it's just repeating now the length of this, but later that will probably change because there's a part 2. Let's see. So we're going to repeat the length of the list, right? Of the example list. So this should be example. And then we need to call this parse to fill up our buffer. with the, we need to get one of the items. So we need one of the items of the, this number one here from our list. So that's what we need to send into the parser. So where's that item number? Right here. And this will be of example. And this is going to be the, using the data index, so that it can change each time. So we're going to need to change the data index in this loop. Right here. Okay, so now what are we doing? So that basically we've zeroed out the accumulator, set up the index. We're going to loop as many times as the list. Each time we're grabbing one of the items out of the list based on the index, and then we're incrementing the index. So what we're going to do is the two my blocks, we're going to check increase, check decrease. And these are going to basically change the accumulator. And then we should just be able to print out the accumulator. So this is going to say here. So I'm going to turn those off. We have scratch. The scratch says 0. That's not right, obviously. Do we have, our example is, yeah, we do have items in our example. Our buffer is getting full. Is that the last item in the buffer? The 1, 3. Yeah, that is the last item. Buff increase, decrease. Change data index. That's the data index. There's the data index. Make sure that's working. Yep, that is working. I probably got something wrong right here. So each time through this list, I need to take the value of whatever the second one is and turn it to the value of the first one at the bottom of this loop. So that's the bit that I forgot. So I'm setting, because basically it's following. This first gets set on whatever the old second was. It's initially set here. It sets second. At the end of this loop, it should set the first one as the old second, and then it comes back around and grabs a new second. So it's like the first one is trailing behind it. It's whatever the last one was, whatever the number behind it was. So I need to increment that. Or, yeah. So this one should be first. And this needs to be equal to second. I'm going to have it twice. And this is happening right down here. Okay, so say hello and all that stuff. Now we have 2. I'm not sure if there was any other things that I edited here. Hopefully I didn't. Okay, let's see what we're supposed to get. So this is, okay, we're supposed to have 2. This one is safe. This one is safe. And we could try this directly. Just to see if we are getting, specifically it's safe on the decline. So I'm just going to partially make this one out again. So I'm going to set the accumulator to 0. I'm going to call the parse. paste that in there. So we want this to pass on the declining. So I'm going to check the decline. And I'm just going to have it say the accumulator at the end. I'm just making sure that I'm getting the positive on the correct solution. Okay. So that is giving me a 1. Let's try the other one. The increase. This one should give me a 0. Yeah, it does give me a 0. Okay. And the other one that is the safe one is this one is an increasing. So it looks like it's working. I'm just checking, like it is working the way that it's supposed to be working. So this should be a 1 on the increase. There it goes. And it should be a 0 on the decline. Okay. So that's the example data. Let me try it on the real data then. Variables. So I have an example one. What I need to do is the actual data, the input. For only input. Okay. I'm going to turn those variables off real quick. So this one's the input. There's like 1,000 of them, is there? And it puts one extra line at the bottom, and that might give me some weird edge case numbers that I didn't. So I'm just going to get rid of it. Or it gave me 2 lines. Okay. So let's try to run it on that now. And we need to not see that so we can see Scratch. It says 2. Oh, it says 2. I didn't change these. These need to be using input now. Okay, so I got 314. Hopefully that is a correct number. Oh, that is not right. Okay, so awesome. Answer is too low. It's the right answer for, oh. Okay, so this is not my my program being wrong. This is me using the data from my other account. So it's telling me curious that it's from a different account. Yeah. So I need to get the data right here. That's just two. And this input is not right. I'll leave it there. Oops. Say input 2 txt, and it gives me a line at the top. I'm just going to make sure there's not an extra line at the bottom. Okay. So that was 314. So it should not be that. So if I pull this data in again, let's delete all of input. I'm going to delete. Now I'm going to import it from input 2. There we go. Get rid of that line. Okay. So we should have a different number this time. 526. There we go. Got a gold star. Okay, so part 2 is the one that just, I mean, I had this part done pretty quickly, like quicker than I just did it here. Like the very first time, even though I hadn't used Scratch, pretty quickly. This second part, 3 days I was stuck on. I had this test data, no problem. I had these other edge cases people had, no problem at all. But I still couldn't get it to work. So now we have this thing where basically we can throw out one of the numbers, and this becomes really problematic because if you throw out, say, which one do I? So it doesn't show all the cases here. It doesn't, but anyway. So if I throw out 3, if I'm comparing 1 and 3 and it's no good, I need to compare 1 and 2, and if that's good, it's okay. But if I have to compare 3 and 2, I also need to make sure that 3 is okay with whatever's before it. If there is something before it, which is like, yeah, I don't know what the best way, like in Scratch, you can't really parse things like this. So this becomes extremely problematic. So hopefully it'll work this time. I'm going to shrink this down, give us a little more space. Just leave this stuff over here like this. So these are kind of basically, you know, they're one is checking if it's going up, the other one's checking if it's going down. And you can get rid of just one bad one. So like I need to keep track of that. So what I've done is I've made a variable called one wrong. So like if one wrong is 0, I can let one be wrong. But when I do that, I set it to 1, and then the next time around it doesn't. So it's just it just lets me do it one time basically. In here, I'm stopping the script. We're going to remove that, and we're going to start putting some more logic in here. First, I want to know if basically if I can let one of them skip, if one of them can be wrong. Do an if else. Where's that one wrong? Right there. So if one wrong equals 0, then we can do some meta logic. If it doesn't equal 0, that means this is the second time something's gone wrong. This is going to go up here in a minute. I'm just keeping it out here for ease. So then we need to do some more stuff. As long as the buffer index is smaller than the length of the buffer, we can grab the next one, which I'm going to call next. It gets confusing. I have first and second, and then next is the third one basically, but I'm also going to have a previous. So it's basically next, the next one beyond the pair that I'm checking, and also maybe there's a previous one that I need to check. So I'm going to make 2 more variables called next and previous. This is all very scientific here. But I can only check next if there is a next. If my index is already the same as the length of the buffer, say my buffer length is 6, I have 6 items in my buffer and I'm on index number 6, I can't pull in the 7th one because there is no 7th one, right? But that's okay. I can just ignore it because if this is the first time one doesn't match and I'm at the end of the list, then that's fine. I can just let it go. So this one wrong, when I check it, I also need to change. I need to increment one wrong so I never get into this again. So it's just a one time. So I'm going to see if this is the first time that I've gotten a match wrong. And whatever logic happens here, it doesn't matter. It's going to be incremented, so I'll never fall into this trap again. It's always going to stop the code. I need to check to make sure the buffer index is smaller still than the buffer length. So the length of the buffer. So if it's not, then like I said, we don't need to do any other logic. We're on the last one. So it's just going to pass by. But if there is another one past this, we need to check. So if there is, we're going to have the next one set. That one's going to be the same that we set the this one here. Except we're just going to add one to it. Add one to the index. Because we're getting the next one in line, basically. We're checking the third one. That's why we needed to check this first, because we're doing this. So now we're going to start checking first one to the next one and the second one to the next one, the way we did here. So I'm just going to copy this. It's not going to be exactly the same, but it's going to be quite similar. And this is an else, yeah. So the first one we're going to check is if, so the first and the second one have failed. So I'm going to check the first with the next one. So instead of the second one here, I'm going to change this to next. And all of the rest of this is the same. I'm going to do this another time too. So I'm just going to duplicate this first and leave it up here. Sorry, this should just be an if block. I didn't know whether there was an else on this. If it's okay, we don't care about it. It's passing through. But if it fails, we're going to see if something else will succeed. So we're basically looking for the failure to end the script. If it doesn't fail, we're letting the script go, and eventually it's going to let the accumulator be +1. So we're looking for the path that failed. So we're checking to see if this is not true. If this is not true, and that's the same thing we did up here too. We're looking for the failure path when we were ending the script. Now we're doing more processing because we have to kind of skip. So we're getting this next, and we're checking it just like we did with the second one. When we're inside of this one and we've set this next one, no matter what we do, we're going to do something very much like this. Because we've pushed one ahead. This is very confusing, but we've pushed it one ahead, so we actually need to increment this thing twice into the normal loop. So it's going to be incremented once here, but we've like looked ahead one extra item to see if it's okay. And since we've looked ahead one extra item, we actually need to move the buffer twice. So it's already moving once here. So I'm going to move it one more time here. And I'm going to set this next one to 2, because we're really, the third one is acting as our next one. So I'm just doing it here. I'm incrementing it here because then back here it's setting it to the first. So then in the next iteration through this loop, we're going to be moved 2 slots forward, and whatever was the next one, the third one that we had to check and it eventually was successful, that is our first one, and we're grabbing a new second one and we're going to check that. I don't really know how to explain that very well, but it's something like that. So because we're basically looking one more ahead. So this looking one more ahead part needs to do this, because we need to now increment our buffer twice, not once. So like I said, we're looking for failure. So if this didn't fail, if this was actually successful in the not and it passes by, we're fine, and it's just going to keep going. But if it fails, we have to check something else. So we're checking our first and our next, which is our third, and that failed. So now we're going to check second and next, which is second and third, or whatever, however you want to say it, and see if that succeeds. Okay. If it doesn't succeed, we got to stop the script. If it does succeed, we now need to check that if there was a previous, we need to make sure previous and second are okay. So it's, yeah, very weird. So if this fails right here, we basically more processing. So I'm going to have an if else. And now I'm checking, like I said, this is checking first and next, first to next. This one's going to be checking second and next. Right here. And I'm going to check if it succeeds. If it succeeds, I need to do another check. If it fails, my script is done. So I'm going to put a stop, just this script right here on the failure. That's why I'm just removing the not, because this has two paths, whereas this one only has one path that I care about. So now I need to check the previous. If the previous doesn't exist, then it's fine. But if it does exist, I need to make sure that it didn't fail. So I'm still checking for failure. So if it doesn't exist, I don't care anymore, you know? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if the buffer index is bigger than 2. If it's not bigger than 2, then I can't pull. If I go 2 backwards, it doesn't exist. So let's look at this buffer real quick. So I always pull this one as first, and right away in the loop, the first thing I pull is the second one. So my index is 2 right away in the loop. Now, if I'm checking this one here for next, if this is third, and 6 and 7 are okay, I check these and they're okay. I now need to check if 6 and the thing before, if 7 is the bad guy, I need to check if 6 and whatever is before 7. But if there's nothing before 7, I don't need to check it. So basically, if I'm indexed at 2 right here, I have nothing before 7. I can't go back 2. That will take me to index 0 that doesn't exist. So I only need to check that if I'm bigger. If I'm over here at, if I'm checking 6 and 4, and then I check 4 and my next is 2, so I check 4 and 2, and that's good. So now I need to check if 4 and 7 are still good, and 6 is the bad guy. I need to check if 4 and 7 are still good. So to do that, I had to have an index of 3 and go backwards twice. But if my index is already 2, I can't go backwards twice, but I don't need to check it then. So this first if block here is going to make sure that I can index backwards far enough. So I'm going to say if the index is bigger than 2. If it's not bigger than 2, I can just drop the first item. I don't need to check if the thing jumped over it, if they're still good. I don't need to check it because there's nothing back there. So this is buff index. Yeah. So buff index needs to be bigger than 2 for me to either check. If it's not, it's just going to carry on. It's not going to end the script. I'm only looking for the failure. So if it does, I need to set a previous now. So previous. And how did I set it up here? So this is going to be -2. So now that I have this, I have to do one last check. And if this check fails, I don't care if it succeeds. It's fine if it succeeds. But if it fails, I need to end the script. Okay, so, and it's like this one here. I'm just going to copy this for a second. I don't have to build all those blocks up again. Okay, so this one I'm checking second and previous. So this is previous, second and previous. Okay, so if this one fails, I need to end the script. And this should be, I've built the previous one, and this should be in here. That is in there. That is there. Hopefully I haven't made any mistakes. I need to duplicate this, but with the reverse math. It's all the same except for here. So right in here, this is where I need to duplicate. So it's these need to go the other direction, basically. These are swapped, and it's a minus. So this is next, first, next, first. It's just the arrow should be the other way, and this should be a minus instead of a plus. And that looks right. Now I don't know which one is the old one. Oh, there it is. Okay, so this is the one. The good one. No. Okay. What? I duplicated it twice, did I? Okay, so this plus one down here. So this is next, second, next, second, next. Second. Next. Second. And this one here. This one is second previous. I'll just put this back in and change it to previous. I'm going to do all this and find out there's a bug somewhere, and I'm going to be looking at blocks forever. Okay. So this should go in here. And that hopefully is correct. Give it a little more space. Okay. So on our test data, what are we looking for? I think we're looking for 4, correct? So this 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have 4 safe on our test data. So we still have input. We need to change it over to example. Oops, I can't see. Okay, that's giving me 2. Example. I should be getting 4. This is example, right? Yeah, example. And there's my example data. 764. Yeah, it's the same. Oh, I need to set the one wrong. I need to set it to 0 each time in the beginning. All right, let's try that again. Okay, so that's 4 on the test data, but the test data and the real data are vastly different. So really hope that I don't get any edge cases here. So we got 566. Let's try that. Let's see. Come on. Oh, I got a gold star. That's the most beautiful gold star ever. Return. It only took like 3 days. Share your triumph. Like, I got it on day 4 or 5, finally. Am I in Blue Sky still? I think I have another bot on X following me, if I'm not mistaken. Let's check. Let's see if I have a bot following me. The home says I have 1 follower. Let's see who the follower is. Angela Sweet, pretty sweet. A little bit suspect that no picture, no nothing, no posts, no anything. It's not 7,000 following, but it looks like a bot. Nothing about coding here. Nothing's going on here. They're not following anybody I'm following. I'm almost positive this is just another bot. Anyway, that was the most confusing. So it's successful. I'm happy about that. Not very good at explaining how it worked, but I'm doing the same thing going up and down, but basically I'm just checking cases. So where is it? The example? Can I make it bigger? So if I check these 2, okay, and they fail, then I check this one. I check 1 and say I check 1 and 2. 1 and 2 fails. I then check 1 and 3. If 1 and 3 succeeds, then 2 was no good, right? I don't care about that. I just make 3 turns into 1 for me, and I move over. I increment, and this turns into 2. Now I'm checking 1 and 2 again over here. Okay, so if literally 1 and 2 fail, I check 3, 1 and 3. If 1 and 3 succeed, I increment my index 2 times. I set first to the third one, and now I look at 3 and 4. And first is going to be 3, and second is going to be 4. So that's an easy one. But if I check 1 and 2 and it fails, then I go and check 1 and 3 and that also fails. I now need to check 2 and 3. If 2 and 3 succeed, I need to check if there's anything before 1. If there is no before 1, I don't care. If there is a before 1, it also needs to, the one before 1 needs to check with 2 to make sure that they're in line. So, yeah. And the same thing here. Like if I'm at the end, say, oh, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if I'm checking 4 and 5 and it fails, I'm going to say, hey, do I have another one, a next one that I can check? If I don't have a next one, that's it. I just say, okay, if it's my first failure, I'm looking forward. If I can't look forward, well, it was my first failure, so the last number doesn't count. I skip it and I don't care because I have one that can be wrong. Any other time, if I already have that one that's been wrong and I go and any match fails, I don't need to do any logic. If the down here, so that's what this first one's catching. This is only letting me do more logic if the one hasn't been wrong before. The end of this is end this script. So yeah, so it's kind of weird. Like I said, I'm checking a pair, and then I look forward, and if I can check I'm always, anything that succeeds when I'm looking forward, I always got to increment it twice, and I'm gonna make my first, which is basically my trailing thing, whatever's following me, I'm going to take the third one and turn it into the first one and increment it twice if there's any success that's happening. If not, then the script ends. On the case that at 2 and 3 that I have to check, I have to go check the one before 1 and make sure that that is also in line with what 2 was to be, or you won't get the right answer. So yeah, not really explaining it very well. Scratch kick my butt, or this one did, but so I hope that was entertaining for anybody watching. That was Advent of Code number 2, or day number 2 in Scratch. So thanks for watching. Have a good day. Bye.